And that's fair. And when it came to Maxwell, it was about the idea, right? They would bring these girls in and then they would have them recruit other girls. And that was kind of the network that was being built up. From a prosecutorial point of view, from a legal point of view, somebody's looking at this and saying, wait a minute, I'm looking at these filings and they're identifying certain people or they're redacting certain other people. And they say, there's not enough evidence to charge this person or limited evidence regarding involvement. What does that mean? So for a layperson, what does that mean?
For an average person, what does all of this actually mean? The cover story appears to collapse. Many believe the Epstein files would expose a powerful circle of untouchable elites. Instead, an FBI summary arrives claiming there is no client list, no blackmail footage, and no evidence of third-party abusers. Only Jeffrey Epstein and Maxwell. That conclusion was supposed to close the chapter. Instead, it raises more questions. Internal emails reportedly reveal that investigators reviewed more than 3 million pages of documents and examined over 1 million images and videos. Despite the massive review, officials say no evidence directly ties powerful figures to the alleged abuse. In February 2025, Pam Bondi appears on television stating that a client list is sitting on her desk. By July 7, 2025, however, the Justice Department insists that no such list exists. Congress pushes for disclosures in November. Releases begin in December but soon pause for additional review. Victims reportedly describe being sent to royalty and political figures, yet internal memos label those claims as uncorroborated. If this represents the cleanest conclusion to one of the most disturbing scandals in recent history, many observers wonder why it feels so incomplete and who might still be protected.
This just broke moments ago. Democrats on the House Oversight Committee have released photos from Jeffrey Epstein's estate. We're getting dribs and drabs of this, and we had some pictures already, and here's some. There are some that show Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Steve Bannon, Bill Gates, and others. None of the released images depicts any misconduct. None is believed to depict underage girls. It was not immediately clear when or where they were taken or by whom.
The Justice Department describes the investigation as one of the most exhaustive reviews in modern history. Internal communications dated March 20, 2025, state that teams of agents and prosecutors personally reviewed more than 1 million images and videos recovered from devices seized in 2019. Investigators reportedly flagged, cataloged, and preserved any file that might depict women under the age of 30. Authorities also searched residences in New York and the United States Virgin Islands. Surveillance systems were reportedly found near entrances, but not inside private living spaces. Officials note that many systems retained recordings for only limited periods. Investigators further explain that certain recordings from 2019 were not seized because they were considered unrelated to alleged activity from the 1990s and early 2000s. The process sounds thorough and systematic. However, critics note that investigations sometimes focus heavily on what is not found, which can shift attention toward evidence that may never have been stored or preserved.
So first, I think we just have to say, and you set it up well, there are two real storylines here. One is what is in these files that we can see and that we can actually learn. We're going to get on that first. There's also the story about what is not in these files or what is heavily redacted, because that is also sparking a nerve.
By July 7, 2025, the Justice Department publicly states that Epstein did not maintain a client list and that no additional files will be released. The language is definitive, and the case is labeled inactive. Yet months earlier, in February 2025, Bondi told a television audience that an Epstein client list existed and was physically on her desk. That statement spreads rapidly across social media, sparking speculation and prompting lawmakers to demand transparency. Later, an internal email dated December 30, 2024, clarifies that an address book entered into evidence at trial was not a client list, despite media portrayal. The message explicitly states that no official client list exists. This contradiction raises further questions. If the list never existed, why was it described as tangible? Some observers suggest that such phrasing can influence public expectations and temporarily ease political pressure.
Does defy common sense for any common criminal. Why would you maintain your own evidentiary criminality? But to Jason Chaffetz's point, that doesn't mean there aren't clients. Just because there might not be a list doesn't mean there are not clients. And Ghislaine Maxwell could be put to the test on naming the names, creating the list after the fact of people that she saw on the plane, Buck, or at the island. And
internal memos continue expanding on these conclusions. They reportedly state that none of the reviewed images depict abuse involving anyone other than Epstein and Maxwell. Officials acknowledged that approximately 4 to 5 alleged victims accused other adult men of misconduct. However, they claimed there was insufficient evidence to support federal charges, and those cases were referred to local authorities. Documents also reference allegations involving adult women, including a woman described as being between 18 and 20 years old at the time. Again, officials state there was insufficient evidence to prosecute. One internal note emphasizes that no additional victims described being directly instructed by Epstein or Maxwell to engage in activity with other men. Observers note that such wording narrows responsibility to explicit instruction rather than environmental influence. Legal experts often point out that insufficient evidence does not necessarily mean the absence of evidence. However, public messaging tends to simplify complex legal distinctions, often reducing the conclusion to a single headline. No proof of a wider network.
The Justice Department has finally released some of the highly anticipated Epstein files. More than 300,000 pages of documents related to the late convicted sex offender were made public today. They include photos, flight logs, grand jury testimony, and a lot of heavy redaction.
Meanwhile, Congress passes the Epstein Files Transparency Act on November 18, 2025, and the president signs it into law the following day. By December 19, 2025, the Justice Department begins releasing records, including photographs Epstein reportedly kept of various well-known individuals he encountered over the years. The images spread quickly across social media, though contextual information remains limited. Some previously released estate photographs include events Epstein reportedly did not attend or images he did not personally take. Nevertheless, recognizable faces generate widespread public speculation. In early January, officials paused further disclosures, citing the need for additional review. On January 30, 2025, authorities announced the release of more than 3 million pages of documents, 2,000 videos, and 180,000 images. The sheer volume overwhelms analysts and the public alike. Despite the scale of the release, the official conclusion remains unchanged. No verified recordings linking powerful third parties, and no confirmed evidence of elite trafficking networks, only a massive archive of material centered on a limited circle of responsibility.
When it comes to what's in these files, we've seen dozens of new photos we haven't seen before of Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell with very high-profile people, celebrities, people like Mick Jagger and Michael Jackson, like you showed, also like British royalty and actors. All of that we sort of knew was happening. I want to highlight specifically two for the public interest, and that is President Clinton and President Trump.
This is when older details begin resurfacing under renewed scrutiny. In May 2009, Virginia Giuffre files a lawsuit claiming she was arranged to have encounters with royalty, politicians, academics, and businessmen. The lawsuit does not publicly identify the men involved. In March 2011, the British tabloid Daily Mail publishes a widely circulated photograph showing Prince Andrew with his arm around Giuffre, sparking a public relations crisis for the royal family. The FBI later interviews her regarding her allegations. By December 2014, court filings reference alleged encounters with foreign presidents and a well-known prime minister. All individuals mentioned publicly deny wrongdoing. These allegations remain in public memory for years. However, in newly released 2025 memos, investigators state they cannot corroborate claims that victims were trafficked to other powerful men. One victim's testimony is described as inconsistent with other accounts. At that point, the narrative shifts. The accusations are not dismissed entirely, but they are reframed as isolated and unverified.
The Justice Department has finally released some of the highly anticipated Epstein files. More than 300,000 pages of documents related to the late convicted sex offender were made public today. They include photos, flight logs, grand jury testimony, and a lot of heavy redactions.
Financial records also come under intense examination. Investigators analyze bank transactions, payments made to models, and transfers that once fueled theories about a large, organized network. Officials ultimately conclude there is no evidence supporting structured payments connected to third-party abuse. Still, some documents contain references that spark online speculation. One file mentions a wire transfer request totaling $11,000 and includes an account entry reading ball.name, followed by references to Wovia Bank and Clear Lake Center LLC. Online communities quickly amplify the detail. Analysts later suggest the entry is likely a corrupted or misspelled bank reference. Nevertheless, rumors spread faster than corrections. Conspiracy forums attach symbolic interpretations to the account entry, connecting it to ritualistic and mythological themes. Sources close to the investigation note that releasing such documents without detailed context can create informational gaps. Officials maintain that there is no evidence of occult or secretive activity. However, online communities often interpret the same material very differently.
Files. We've seen dozens of new photos we haven't seen before of Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell with very high-profile people, celebrities, people like Mick Jagger and Michael Jackson, like you showed, also like British royalty and actors. All of that we sort of knew was happening. I'm going to highlight specifically two for the public interest, and that is President Clinton and President Trump.
Behind the scenes, political tension surrounding the files intensifies. On July 15, 2025, members of Congress introduced the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Later that year, a congressional committee releases emails involving Epstein and several prominent figures, including Steve Bannon, Larry Summers, and Reid Hoffman. In one 2019 email sent to a journalist, Epstein claims that Donald Trump was aware of certain activities involving young women. The email provides no additional explanation, but it spreads rapidly across media platforms. 2 days later, Attorney General Pam Bondi announces that federal prosecutors in Manhattan will investigate Epstein's connections to political figures, including Bill Clinton and others. None of those individuals are accused of misconduct by Epstein's accusers, yet the optics generate intense political debate. Supporters frame the investigations as accountability efforts, while critics label them politically motivated. Regardless, the Epstein files transition from historical records into active political controversy.
If you tend towards cynicism or skepticism, you might wonder, is everything about Epstein and his powerful male friends, is that coming out? That remains to be seen.
Events escalate further in late July 2025. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche interviews Ghislaine Maxwell, who denies wrongdoing and claims she never witnessed inappropriate behavior involving Trump. Shortly afterward, Maxwell is transferred from a low-security prison in Florida to a minimum-security federal prison camp in Texas. Officials describe the transfer as administrative, though critics question the timing, noting that it occurs during heightened public scrutiny surrounding document releases. During the same period, personal and institutional developments intensify public attention. Giuffre's memoir is published later that year, revisiting her allegations involving powerful individuals. Shortly afterward, King Charles III removes Prince Andrew's remaining royal titles, adding further consequence to the broader fallout. These events place official denials, personal reputational damage, and institutional responses into direct collision within a short time frame.
Is and never was part of the Epstein files. She was sentenced in 2025. This was an interview by Trump's lawyer to protect Trump from the fallout about the Epstein files. What this really is nothing but a sketchy PR stunt by the Department of Justice. And we have seen this movie before. The Maxwell interview is to the Epstein files what the Barr letter was to the Mueller investigation.
On the surface, the official narrative remains unchanged. A comprehensive investigation, no verified evidence linking elite third-party abuse, and no confirmed client list. However, a major point of tension remains. The Justice Department confirms that certain materials, particularly sensitive images and videos identifying victims, will never be released publicly. Privacy laws allow authorities to withhold such material to protect victims, a policy widely considered legally justified. Yet, this decision also prevents the public from independently verifying what exists within sealed files. Members of Congress are granted limited access to unredacted documents under controlled conditions at the Justice Department. Reports emerge suggesting lawmakers can review the materials but cannot copy or publicly disclose details. Some lawmakers hint at unresolved questions without providing specifics, while others claim the documents align with official summaries. As a result, the public remains outside what feels like a locked room. The central contradiction continues to grow stronger. If every document has been thoroughly reviewed and no explosive evidence exists, critics ask why each new disclosure appears to circle unresolved questions without directly addressing them.
All of it's really intriguing to me. I mean, again, the big picture is we don't normally look in prosecutors' files if there's not a trial. You know, we kind of let the evidence play out after an indictment. We see what happens at a trial. Here we've got this kind of bizarro world, I think maybe fueled by special counsels where they write reports, where everyone feels like we're entitled because we care so much about Jeffrey Epstein to look at all the evidence and find out if there's other names. Well,
what keeps resurfacing is not a single document, but a pattern of containment. Every time scrutiny intensifies, the response tightens around procedure. Early prosecutors routed charges through narrow channels. Later, federal teams define the scope with precision. Even now, access is granted under supervision. Documents are filtered through redactions, and conclusions are summarized before the raw material is absorbed. People who have watched this saga for 2 decades say the rhythm feels familiar. The scandal grows teeth, then the system fits it with a muzzle. The public sees motion and assumes exposure. Insiders see layers of review and assume insulation. When transparency becomes a managed process rather than an uncontrolled spill, control itself becomes the story. The official language never wavers, but the choreography around it keeps shifting.
From what I've gathered from your articles, this seems to be a global network that Epstein was a part of, and I believe there are multiple Epsteins. Like, I don't believe that Jeffrey Epstein was the head of the snake. Yeah, like, you know, they never go after the head of the snake. They never go after the head
of the snake, quote unquote, are just, it's the billionaire class, and so there's a faction of these billionaires in our oligarchy. And of course, the American oligarchy, you know, the American oligarchs don't necessarily, a lot of them don't have an allegiance necessarily to the United States.
Consider how reputations orbit this case. Names appear in contact books, at social gatherings, and in email threads that read as casual and transactional. A financier sends notes to journalists, references prominent figures, and drops lines that imply knowledge without explaining it. Then those names surface again in committee releases, framed as correspondence rather than accusations. That distinction matters legally, but politically it is radioactive. Industry figures insist that association does not equal involvement. Lawmakers counter that proximity raises questions. Careers bend under the weight of implication alone. Some retreat from public view, while others go on the offensive by filing lawsuits or issuing denials. The files do not charge them, but they do not clear them either. Instead, they leave them suspended in ambiguity, which in a media ecosystem becomes its own punishment.
And in the emails, it is quite clear that Jeffrey Epstein had a wide, almost incalculably wide circle of associates. People who were celebrities, people who were either in foreign governments or leaders of foreign governments, business tycoons, and the like.
The institutions involved understand that ambiguity cuts both ways. When the Justice Department distributes binders marked declassified to far-right influencers, much of the information is already public. The move sparks celebration in some circles and skepticism in others. Critics call it theater, while supporters call it overdue sunlight. Meanwhile, technical language about protective orders and confidential exhibits shields the most sensitive material from broad release. Officials say they are protecting victims. Detractors argue that secrecy protects reputations. Both claims can coexist. What becomes harder to interpret is intent. Is this an earnest attempt to close a case with finality, or a strategic narrowing designed to prevent collateral fallout? People close to the situation suggest motivations are layered: political pressure, institutional pride, fear of missteps, and loyalty networks stretching back decades.
It's layers upon layers. It's those Russian nesting dolls, and you open it, and there's another one in there, and you open, there's another one in there.
Corruptions at all time, bro. The Epstein files.
I heard there's no files. I heard it's a hoax. And then all of a sudden, he's going to release the files. Well, I thought there was no files.
Man.
He wants an investigation now.
The human dimension refuses to stay buried. When a posthumous memoir revisits allegations of being trafficked to powerful men, it reignites emotions that official summaries cannot extinguish. The removal of royal titles, the relocation of a convicted accomplice, and the resurfacing of old photographs all feed the sense that consequences radiate outward, even when charges do not. In high society and political circles, invitations begin to shift. Boards quietly reconsider memberships. Donors distance themselves. The absence of new indictments does not translate into comfort. It translates into watchfulness. People speak more cautiously. They scrub timelines and revisit old emails because, even if prosecutors claim the circle is small, the stain feels broader.
And Stephanie Ramos joining us live. And Stephanie, there have also been more cases filed in court with those accusers attempting to go after potential co-conspirators.
That's exactly right, Whit. 2 more women are suing Epstein's estate. They say they were recruited by an unnamed Epstein employee. Now, this is in addition to the lawsuit filed against Epstein's longtime friend, Ghislaine Maxwell, who is also accused of recruiting for him. Maxwell denies any wrongdoing.
Then there is the cultural mutation. When a single line in a financial document morphs into a symbol of ancient worship online, it reveals how thin the barrier is between paperwork and myth. Analysts dismiss the interpretation as a misreading, while online communities double down. They link artifacts to ritual narratives, connect shipping receipts to sacred cloth, and weave a tapestry of hidden meaning. Officials roll their eyes, but they cannot erase the screenshots. The more the formal narrative insists on ordinary explanations, the more some audiences search for extraordinary ones. That dynamic erodes trust from both sides. Believers accuse the system of concealment. Skeptics accuse believers of delusion. The original scandal splinters into parallel realities, each convinced the other is blind.
The money that he did. I want to know what the transactions are he was involved in. And that should all be something that the Treasury Department, the FBI can get access to, because in the meantime, what we're left with is Ghislaine Maxwell effectively downplaying this whole thing. Yeah, he hid it from everybody. Nobody else was involved. There's no proof of anything else. There's no blackmail. There's no foreign intelligence tie. Oh, what?
Political rivalries exploit that fracture. Announcements of investigations into ties with specific figures are framed as justice by one camp and retaliation by another. The fact that none of those individuals are accused by victims in criminal filings does not slow the optics war. It accelerates it. The files become leverage. Allies argue that if the investigation found no broader conspiracy, then critics have spent years chasing shadows. Opponents counter that the absence of charges reflects an absence of will. Each side points to different pages. Each side claims vindication. In the middle sits the FBI's credibility, stretched between exhaustive review and public disbelief. When law enforcement assures the public that every image and device has been thoroughly examined, yet suspicion continues to grow, the question shifts from evidence to trust. Trust is fragile in a case where the central figure never faces trial. The tragic death in custody leaves a vacuum that no document release can fill. Without a courtroom reckoning, there is no cross-examination of witnesses regarding broader networks, and no public testing of allegations involving powerful associates. What remains are civil suits, memoirs, committee hearings, and internal summaries. These tools illuminate individual pieces but never assemble a complete picture. Some legal experts argue this reflects the limitation of reality. Not every rumor evolves into a prosecutable case. Others contend that the absence of a living defendant conveniently shields others from scrutiny. The files attempt to freeze the narrative in place. Yet narratives built on absence rarely remain frozen. Money continues to move quietly in the background. Financial institutions face scrutiny for their role in facilitating transactions. Corporate boards confront questions about how long they should tolerate association before severing ties. High-profile donors navigate a delicate balance between loyalty and self-preservation. The cost is not only legal, it is reputational. An email released in a committee disclosure can undo years of carefully cultivated public image. A photograph sealed in an exhibit can cast a lasting shadow, even if it reveals nothing illegal. Insiders in finance and politics speak openly about risk management, distancing strategies, and contingency planning. They understand that scandals like this rarely erupt in a single explosion. They seep, corrode, and resurface in cycles.
Maybe Epstein never kept this. And if that's the case, somebody as rich and powerful as him with his kind of connections, allegations that he had ties to other countries, what have you, I guess he's not the blackmailer that people thought?
Well, it's impossible for us to know, right? We're all speculating on what we're seeing that is released, but...
Meanwhile, the mechanics of review remain opaque. Members of Congress who access unredacted files describe the experience in vague terms, constrained by confidentiality rules. Some hint at frustration, while others suggest reassurance. The public is left interpreting body language and tone rather than substance. That dynamic fuels speculation. If nothing shocking exists, why not state it plainly? If troubling material exists but falls short of criminal charges, who decides how much the public deserves to know? The Justice Department stands by its summaries. Critics demand raw access. Supporters warn against turning sensitive material into public spectacle. The stalemate becomes self-perpetuating. The more authorities insist the matter is settled, the more segments of the public feel dismissed. What lingers most is the emotional residue. Families of alleged victims seek acknowledgement beyond technical language. Political adversaries search for leverage. Institutions pursue closure. The files attempt to present a definitive narrative, an exhaustive search, limited culpability, and no broader conspiracy. But narratives do not exist solely on paper. They exist in perception, and perception shifts when key elements appear to conflict. When officials reference a list that later disappears, suspicion grows. When allegations involving royalty meet findings of no corroboration, questions multiply. When disclosures pause just as public interest peaks, doubt intensifies. None of these elements alone prove concealment, but together they create a pattern that resists simple explanation. Now we are left examining a record that claims finality while generating renewed suspicion. If the investigation is truly as thorough as described, why does each new disclosure reopen wounds instead of closing them? If there is no hidden roster of elites, why has the idea taken such deep root in public imagination? And if institutions are protecting victims, who is protecting public trust? Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments. Choose a side, question the narrative, or defend it, but do not assume this story ends neatly. The fallout continues to unfold, and sometimes the silence surrounding certain pages speaks louder than any headline.